It was the kind of late afternoon that hummed with regular life, shopping bags crinkling, car doors slamming shut, the dull murmur of carts scraping against concrete. I was halfway across the parking lot of a local grocery store, keys in one hand, phone in the other, when something made me slow down. A cart sat oddly near the edge of the lot, turned askew, almost like it had been abandoned mid-thought. It might have been the way it didn't fit with the others, or maybe the way the sun glinted off the metal, as if drawing attention to it. Whatever it was, I looked twice and caught movement. Not big, just a shift, a little flutter of motion deep in the wire basket. I walked closer. At first, it looked like someone had dropped a blanket, but as I got within a few steps, I saw him. A German shepherd puppy, small enough to curl into himself, but large enough that his oversized paws gave away the breed and the future he was meant to grow into. His fur was matted and dry, streaked with dust. His ears were too big for his narrow head, sticking up awkwardly, more like question marks than features. But what struck me wasn't his shape or size. It was the thing clenched gently between his teeth, a faded blue elephant plush toy. One ear was missing. The fur on the toy was stiff with wear. It had clearly been loved hard. The puppy didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stared at me with the kind of eyes that don't ask for help. They wait for it. Like someone had promised they'd be back. Like he believed that promise. My steps slowed. I kept my voice soft. "Hey there, little guy." He didn't twitch, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just held the elephant tighter, curling his body a little more inward, like he was shielding the only thing he had left. Around us, life continued. A woman passed pushing her cart full of groceries. A kid laughed nearby. A man shouted into a Bluetooth headset, but no one stopped. No one turned. It was like this little soul didn't exist to them. But he was there, completely there. Guarding his past, waiting for a future that hadn't shown up. I crouched down, slow and steady, keeping my hands low. "I'm not here to take it," I whispered. "I just want to sit." He looked at me like he understood. But also like understanding didn't matter. Trust wasn't something he had left in great supply. So I did the only thing I could think of. I sat right there, in the middle of the blacktop, beside the cart. The sun was hot on my back, the pavement rough beneath me, but I stayed. I didn't look at him too hard, didn't reach for him. I just became a quiet part of his world, a shape beside him, not a force pressing in. Cars came and went. No one noticed us, or maybe they did and didn't care. A mother passed with her daughter. The girl tugged at her mum's hand. "Look, Mama." A puppy. The mum barely spared a glance. "Don't touch it," she said, steering the girl away without slowing down. Still, the pup didn't move. Just pulled the toy tighter into his chest, eyes locked on mine like he was still weighing me. I scanned the cart. No note, no collar, nothing but old crumbs in the basket and that elephant. I reached into my messenger bag and pulled out the sandwich I hadn't eaten from lunch. It was half a turkey and cheese. Nothing fancy. I tore a piece off and placed it on the pavement, a few inches away from the cart. Then I scooted back. Not far, but enough. And I waited. I heard it before I saw it, the faintest shift. When I looked again, the food was gone. But the elephant stayed, like even in hunger, he wouldn't give up the last piece of comfort he had. I didn't move closer, just stayed on the ground, heartbeat heavy in my throat. There was something in the air between us, some invisible thread neither of us wanted to break. We didn't know each other, didn't even have names for each other, but somehow we understood the rules. Don't push, don't speak loud, don't break the silence with anything but presence. Time melted. The sun began its slow descent. I should have gone home, should have gone back to my day. But I couldn't. Not when he was still waiting. Waiting for someone who clearly wasn't coming back. And maybe, deep down, he knew it. But even deeper still, he hoped anyway. That kind of hope, it deserves a witness. So I stayed. The sun had begun its slow retreat. When I finally stirred from the heat of the pavement, my legs were stiff. My lower back ached, but I didn't dare leave. The puppy hadn't moved in over an hour, not more than a blink or a breath. He just watched me, the lot, the toy beneath his chin. Every time I shifted slightly or scratched my arm or reached for a water bottle, his eyes would lock onto me, his body tightening, but he never growled, never bared his teeth. It was like his entire spirit was folded into that toy, and anything that came too close might take it from him. And I understood. Some things you hold on to, not because they're valuable, but because they're the only thing left that still remembers warmth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. The world could wait. Instead, I reached into the back of my car and pulled out something I always kept tucked away, an old faded fleece blanket. It was more habit than purpose, having it there. Sometimes it was for rescue runs, sometimes just because I liked knowing I had something soft nearby when the world felt sharp. I returned to the cart and folded the blanket gently into a square. I didn't speak. I didn't gesture, just laid it softly across the bottom of the metal wire. Then I backed away again. He didn't react at first, just blinked at the new object, like it was a trick. But eventually his nose twitched, and he shifted, slowly, carefully. His front paw, stretched out, touched the fleece, then the other. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The toys stayed gripped in his teeth as he inched forward, testing the surface like it might disappear under him. When he finally stepped fully onto the blanket, he didn't curl up. He didn't even sit. He just stood there, half on, half unsure. And for the first time, I saw the subtle tremble in his legs, not from fear, from exhaustion. This puppy had waited too long. I crouched low again, this time a few feet closer, but still far enough not to challenge him. "It's okay," I said, my voice the kind you'd use with a hurt child. "It's just soft, that's all." His eyes flicked toward me, still guarded, but less rigid. He set the elephant down beside him, gently, like it was a sleeping sibling. Then he lowered himself onto the blanket in a cautious spiral, the way animals do when they're not sure if they'll be allowed to rest. I let a long breath slip out of my chest. My heart had been holding itself hostage. This was trust, fragile, newborn, like a candle in the wind, and it made something crack in me. Not loudly, quietly, like a seam that had been holding too long without reinforcement. I got up and walked slowly back to my car, opened the back door, and for a long moment, I just stood there staring at the seat. This wasn't a dog I planned to bring home. This wasn't even a trip where I expected to stop. But sometimes you don't make the choices. Sometimes they're made the moment you decide to kneel down and stay. I grabbed a second blanket, one of the kind you could wrap around something small and shaking. I walked back and crouched beside the cart again. "Okay," I said, speaking more to the universe than to him. "We're gonna try something." He didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched. I reached slowly, inch by inch, until the blanket hovered above him. Then I stopped, waited. He looked at it, looked at me. Then, in one of the smallest movements I've ever seen, he shifted slightly to the side. Not much, just enough to say, "I won't fight." I wrapped him slowly, not tightly, just enough to cradle, to hold. He didn't whine. He didn't resist. He just let his weight settle into the fabric. When I lifted him from the cart, he didn't panic. He didn't thrash. He tucked his head under my chin. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of him, not just physically, but emotionally. This was a soul that had waited far too long to be carried. I placed him gently in the back seat, on the blanket. His toy still rested between his front paws, and then I sat in the driver's seat, keys in hand, unable to start the car. My hands were shaking. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was staring right at me. Not afraid, not angry, just questioning. "Is this real? Are you real? Or am I about to be left again?" I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, but my voice was quieter than ever. "You're not going back there," I said, barely above a whisper. "Not ever." He blinked, slowly. No bark, no tail wag, just that quiet stare that already knew too much about goodbyes. We pulled onto the road. The shopping lot disappeared behind us. And still, he watched, eyes fixed on the window, the sky, the stretch of highway that now led to something he had no word for. Home. The drive home felt longer than usual. Not because of traffic, but because I couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror. Every stoplight, every turn, I checked. The puppy hadn't shifted once. He just sat curled in the back seat, that worn-out elephant still tucked between his front paws, his eyes fixed on the world outside like he was trying to memorize it, just in case he needed to find his way back again. I didn't talk much. I wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't one of those moments where everything feels triumphant and clear. It felt heavy, fragile, like I was holding a story that hadn't yet decided whether it would end in healing or heartbreak. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun had dipped below the rooftops. That blue-orange blend of twilight cast everything in a kind of hush. I turned the engine off and sat still for a few moments. In the silence, I could hear his breathing, light, rhythmic, uncertain. I opened the back door and crouched down. Not reaching for him yet, just offering presence. He was still wrapped in the blanket, his body now less rigid, but still alert. He watched me closely. I whispered, "We're here." He didn't move. I reached in slowly, slid my arms beneath the blanket, and lifted him again. He didn't struggle. He didn't even tense. He simply let it happen, as though he didn't quite believe it was happening at all. Inside my home, the light was soft. I'd left a lamp on in the living room, the kind that cast a warm, golden glow across the couch and floor. I laid the blanket down just off the rug, added a fresh bowl of water, and stepped back. He stood at the edge of it all, still half in the doorway, staring at the space like he couldn't tell if it was real. And then, slowly, cautiously, he stepped in. One paw, then another. He moved like a ghost, slipping into the world of the living. Quiet, unsure, watching for signs he didn't understand. He didn't explore, didn't sniff furniture, or wag his tail like most dogs might. He walked a short circle, glanced at the water, then curled up tight right where I'd laid the blanket. The elephant toy clutched again, like a lighthouse in a strange new sea. I gave him space. I moved around quietly, putting away keys and shoes, avoiding sudden sounds. He watched everything, every motion, every step, but didn't flinch. That night I didn't sleep much. I stayed on the couch, body tense, eyes drifting toward him again and again. Sometimes I'd look over and find him watching me too, not blinking, not moving, just watching, like he needed to confirm every few minutes that I was still there. Around 3 a.m., I heard the softest sound, a shift, a paw. When I opened my eyes, he was beside the couch, still holding the elephant. He set it down on the floor and curled up against the side of the couch, his back pressed lightly into the edge. That small action broke me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. It was trust, a fragile whisper of it. And maybe. I lowered my hand slowly over the couch's edge and let my fingers rest near his head. He didn't pull away. He didn't move toward me either. He just stayed. When I whispered, "I'm right here," I saw his eyes close, not out of fear, out of relief. That night, I don't know if he slept soundly, but I do know he didn't move again. He stayed close, close enough to know I hadn't disappeared. When the morning came, it came slowly. Light filtered in through the blinds, the soft gold of early sun crawling across the hardwood. I sat up quietly, careful not to startle him. He was still there, still curled against the couch, head resting on his paws, elephant beside him like a companion who'd made it through the storm too. For the first time, he looked peaceful. I stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. There was leftover chicken in the fridge. Nothing fancy, just something I'd meant to use the night before. I warmed it up, portioned it onto a plate, and grabbed a bowl of dry food as well. I set both down near him, not too close, just enough that he could choose. Then I stepped back. He sniffed the air but didn't rush, didn't pounce. He stood slowly, stretched each leg like it still didn't quite believe in solid ground, and padded softly to the bowls. He started with the water, sipped gently, then turned to the chicken. One bite, pause, another. Each chew was cautious, slow like someone who'd been punished before for wanting too much. It made my throat tighten. I didn't speak, just let the silence stay kind. When he finished, he sat down again, not curled, just seated, back straight, eyes on me. That was when I realized something. He wasn't just surviving, he was assessing. Me? This place? Everything. Not for safety, for permanence. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, no grand gestures, just breath and space and time. I started talking, not loud, just enough for the room to feel like it had a heartbeat. I told him about the shelter I volunteered at, about the dogs I'd seen come in and out, some angry, some afraid, how some healed and some didn't, how I never planned on keeping any of them, but somehow he didn't feel like just another case. I'd told him my name. Then, as an afterthought, I said, "I guess I should call you something, huh?" He tilted his head. It was subtle, but it was there. I smiled faintly. "You came in a cart." His ears perked, just a little. "Cart," I repeated. Again, that faint lift. I wasn't sure if he liked it, but I was sure of one thing. He heard it, and somewhere in that quiet little head of his, a light flickered. Recognition, or maybe just willingness. It didn't matter. From that moment on, he was caught. In the days that followed, silence became its own language. Cart didn't bark, he didn't whimper, he didn't do the things puppies were supposed to do. No frantic tail chasing, no bursts of excited energy. He was a shadow that followed the light, always present but never demanding, like he was trying to figure out if he belonged in the world I'd brought him into. Wherever I went, he was there. If I moved to the kitchen, I'd hear the faint tap of his paws behind me. If I stepped into the living room, he'd settle at the doorway like a sentry. If I sat at my desk to sort shelter files, he'd curl near my feet, not touching, just close enough to remind me he hadn't vanished. The blue elephant never left his side. He didn't play with it, didn't chew it or toss it. He just held it like a tether to something I couldn't see, a memory I wasn't allowed to touch. I didn't force anything. No baths, no leash, no loud commands. I let the rhythm be his. He didn't need rules. He needed rest, and trust takes time. One afternoon, I sat on the floor beside him, knees drawn up, a mug of tea between my hands. The air was soft with early spring. A breeze drifted in through the open screen door. Cart was lying on the blanket, head resting on his paws, the elephant pressed gently beneath his chin. His ears would twitch, every now and then, catching distant sounds. A car door, bird song, the world humming softly beyond our walls. "You know," I said, not expecting an answer. Most puppies would be tearing up my shoes by now. His ear twitched again. "But you just watch." He didn't lift his head, but I saw the tiniest movement of his eyes toward me, just for a second. It was the kind of moment most people would miss. But when you're learning the language of a dog who doesn't speak, even a blink can feel like a sentence. I set the mug down and slid a little closer, careful not to disturb the elephant between us. "I don't know what they did to you," I said, "and I don't know how long you waited in that cart, but I do know one thing." His eyes were on mine now, steady. "You're not broken." He didn't move, but he didn't look away. And I think, in his own way, he heard me. That night, as I sat scrolling through volunteer reports on my laptop, Cart wandered into the room. He walked slowly, quietly. No sound, no signal. He just came over, stood at my side for a long second, then gently rested his chin on my leg. I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew how much that one small gesture meant. Cart wasn't asking for affection. He was offering trust. I let my hand slide to his head, fingertips brushing the fur behind his ears. "Hey," I whispered, "there you are." He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and I swear he sighed, one of those deep, barely there exhales that lets something old and heavy go. And from that night forward, he started sleeping beside my bed instead of the couch. Still silent. Still watchful. But closer. Like he had moved in just 1 inch more. 2 mornings later, I got a visit. My friend Lana, a social worker who ran outreach programs for kids and teens, stopped by to drop off some flyers for the shelter. I'd told her about Cart in passing, but seeing him in person was something else. As soon as she stepped inside, Cart froze. Not a growl, not a bark. He simply stopped moving. His whole body went still, tense like a held breath. Lana paused at the doorway, reading the room with that calm awareness that made her good at her job. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching down low. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't reach out. Just sat there, hands resting on her knees. "You must be the brave one." Cart didn't move. Not a twitch. He just stared at her, unmoving. Then, so slowly, it looked like the wind might have pushed him. He stepped forward. 1 step. Then another. He reached her, lowered his head, and placed his nose gently in her open palm. She didn't speak, just smiled and let him be there. After a long moment, she looked at me. "He's different," she said. I nodded. "He's not just a rescue," she added. "He's holding something." Later, as she left, she paused on the porch and turned back. "You ever think about therapy work?" I laughed once. "With Cart? He barely trusts me." "Exactly," she said. "That's what makes him perfect. He doesn't demand attention. He offers presence. You can't train that." Her words stuck with me long after the door closed. That night, I sat on the floor, Cart nestled beside me, the elephant between his paws as always. I looked down at him. "I don't know if you're meant for more," I whispered, "but I think you are." He looked up at me. No wag. No sound. But his eyes said everything. Maybe he didn't know what came next, but he was willing to find out. I didn't call Lana the next morning. I waited. Not because I wasn't interested in what she'd said, but because the idea of turning Cart into anything felt fragile, like I might crack something delicate just by putting pressure on it. He was still a puppy, still learning to breathe without fear. The last thing I wanted was to burden him with expectations before he was ready. But 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of soft scratching at the side of my bed. I sat up, heart pounding, unsure if it had been a dream. Then I saw him, Cart, standing still, the elephant in his mouth. He placed it beside the bed, gently, precisely, then looked at me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. That was the moment I knew. He was trying to give, not just survive. Give. And it wasn't about the toy. It was what the toy represented. Safety, memory, hope. And now he was offering it to me. Later that day, I pulled out the packet Lana had left on my coffee table. Flyers, contact forms, trainer referrals. I called the first number on the list. A woman named Elise answered. Her voice was calm, confident. "Therapy dog evaluations?" she repeated when I explained. "We usually start with a few temperament assessments and a basic obedience test. Do you have experience working with rescues?" "I volunteer at a shelter," I said, "but this one's different." "They usually are," she replied, not unkindly. "Bring him in. Let's see what he's made of." That weekend, I drove Cart to a small training facility on the edge of town. I didn't leash him. He still wasn't used to anything around his neck, and I didn't want to rush it. He rode in the back seat, as always, elephant between his paws. When we arrived, Elise was already waiting. She wore jeans, a fleece vest, and had the kind of presence that made dogs calm just by standing still. Cart watched her for a full minute before stepping out of the car. No coaxing. No commands, just quiet decision. He approached slowly, nose twitching in the spring air, body low but not fearful. Elise crouched, palms open. "That's a good boy," she murmured. "Take your time." He did, step by step. Then he touched his nose to her hand. Not a long moment, not dramatic, but deliberate. "He doesn't act like a rescue," she said, glancing up at me. "I think he's still figuring out what he is." She stood, brushing her hands on her knees. "Let's find out." The training started simple. Sit, stay, walk beside me. Cart didn't respond to traditional commands at first. Words didn't mean much to him. But tone, he understood. Gentle encouragement, pauses, soft repetition. Those things mattered. He didn't follow orders. He mirrored trust. And by the end of that first hour, he was walking beside Elise, like he'd known her all his life. "He's not reactive," she noted, watching the way he moved past other dogs without fear or challenge. "And he doesn't chase attention either. That's rare." She handed me a clipboard. "If you're serious, I'd start with weekly sessions. He's got the soul for this. He just needs the structure." I signed the form before I could second guess it. The weeks that followed unfolded like chapters in a book. Cart had never known how to read until now. He learned faster than I expected, not with flair or enthusiasm like some dogs, but with quiet intent, like he understood that what he was doing mattered. Elise began to test him with noise, movement, unfamiliar faces. He never barked, never jumped, just stood still, observed, moved forward when it felt safe. Sometimes I'd find myself watching him, wondering what thoughts moved behind those dark eyes, wondering how much he remembered and how much he'd let go. But one thing was certain. He was learning to show up, not just for me, for others. Our final test before certification was held in a small, simulated classroom with children volunteers. They'd been briefed to be calm, gentle. Some sat on beanbags, others at small desks. The air was full of kid energy, curious, slightly chaotic, but well-intentioned. I kept a close eye on Cart as we entered. His ears twitched, his gaze swept the room. Then he did something that stopped me cold. He walked straight to a little girl sitting cross-legged in the corner, clutching a fox plush that looked almost too new in her small hands. He didn't sniff her, didn't nudge. He just sat beside her. She didn't move at first. Then slowly, so slowly, she reached out and touched the top of his head. He leaned into her hand. No tail wag, no noise, just presence. I saw Elise watching from the doorway, arms folded, her smile soft and knowing. She didn't need to say it. Cart had passed. We drove home in the golden light of late afternoon. Cart lay in the back seat, the blue elephant still by his side, though now more worn than ever. I glanced at him through the mirror. "Cart," I said gently. He looked up. "You did good today." His eyes softened, and for the first time his tail wagged. Just once, but enough. The day of our first official visit arrived faster than I expected. It had only been a few weeks since Cart passed his evaluation, but everything had shifted in that short span. He was still quiet, still watchful, still the same dog who'd curled around an elephant in a shopping cart like it was all he had left. But something inside him had changed. He didn't just exist anymore. He moved with purpose. That morning, I packed a small bag, water, a collapsible bowl, his elephant, though he hadn't carried it in days. Still, I didn't leave it behind. It felt wrong to go without it, like leaving a piece of the story unfinished. Our first assignment was a grief support group for children. Lana had arranged it. "They're gentle," she said. "Just kids who've lost something too big to name. Parents, siblings, homes. Some haven't spoken in weeks." The thought made my stomach twist. What if it was too much? What if Cart wasn't ready? What if I wasn't? But when we arrived, Cart stepped out of the car with that same calm stride I'd seen in training. No hesitation, no nerves, just focus. The building was a modest community center. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, casting long shadows across soft rugs and rounded furniture. No sharp edges, no bright colors. Everything about the room whispered safety. A counselor greeted us quietly at the door. "You're the ones Lana mentioned." I nodded. "This is Cart." She crouched. "Hey, Cart." He didn't move toward her, but he didn't back away either. Just stood and watched. "Come on in," she said. "They're in a circle right now, journaling. You can sit nearby, let him choose." That was always the rule. Let Cart choose. Inside, a dozen kids sat in a wide circle, ages ranging from 5 to 12, each with a notebook or coloring pad. Some scribbled furiously, others just sat still, pens untouched. And then I saw her. A girl, maybe 7, dark hair, hiding most of her face. A stuffed animal, clutched to her chest. A fox, like the one from Cart's evaluation day. Her knees were drawn up, shoulders tight. She wasn't writing, just staring at her lap, like she didn't know how to begin. Cart spotted her too. I saw it in his posture, the slight forward tilt of his ears, the way his head lifted. He walked toward her. Not fast, not straight. He looped around the group, slow and measured, so he wouldn't draw attention. Then he reached her. He sat. Didn't nudge, didn't lean in. Just sat. She didn't notice him at first. Then, slowly, her gaze lifted from her lap and landed on him. I saw her fingers tighten around the stuffed fox. Cart didn't blink. She reached out, tentatively, and brushed her hand along his back. He leaned in, just a little, and for the first time her shoulders dropped. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But she breathed. That was enough. The rest of the visit passed in a kind of quiet grace. Cart moved from child to child, never rushed, never pulled by command. He simply observed, then chose. One boy, maybe 10, had tears streaming down his face without a sound. Cart laid beside him and stayed there until the boy leaned against his fur. Another child, arms crossed tight, refused to engage. Cart didn't press. He lay nearby, watching. By the end of the session, the child uncrossed his arms. I stayed on the sidelines, letting Cart lead. He knew more than I ever could. After the session ended, the counselor approached me. Her voice was hushed. "Your dog, he doesn't just comfort them, he sees them." I looked at Cart. He was lying beside the girl with the fox. Her hand rested lightly on his back now, fingers tangled in his fur. "I think he sees himself in them," I said. When we got home, Cart was quieter than usual. Not tired, just reflective. He didn't go to his blanket or water. Instead, he stood in the hallway, staring at the door. I crouched beside him. "You okay?" He looked at me, then turned and walked into the living room. He lay down slowly, not in his usual spot. This time it was right beside the shelf where I'd placed the elephant earlier that week. He didn't pick it up, just lay there, watching it, and I wondered if he was remembering. Not the pain, but the beginning, the moment he decided not to guard it anymore. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill, not for anyone in particular, just for every child Cart had touched that day, every unspoken ache he'd sat beside, every invisible wound he'd acknowledged with nothing but presence. And as the flame flickered gently in the dark, Cart lay at my feet, his breathing steady, eyes half closed. I didn't say anything. I just stayed near. He didn't need praise, just space. And maybe that was the gift he'd always given, without ever asking for it in return. There were places we were sent to after that, shelters, children's hospitals, recovery centers, and with each one, Cart carried the same quiet rhythm with him. He didn't need instructions. He didn't respond to orders like most dogs. Instead, he listened, watched, waited. And when the time came, he moved, slowly, gently toward the person who needed him most. Not the loudest in the room. Not the one crying, but the one who hadn't made a sound all day. The one whose eyes kept darting to the floor, who sat in the corner as if their pain might go unnoticed if they just stayed still enough. Those were the ones Cart found. He was never loud, never flashy, but he left ripples wherever he went. One afternoon, we visited a school for children with behavioral challenges. Some had trauma histories. Others had diagnoses they hadn't yet learned how to describe. Cart moved through the room like he was part of the air itself, present, calm, never demanding. A boy sat by the window, tapping a pencil against his leg. His name was Jace. 10 years old. Didn't talk much. Had a history of shutting down. Cart approached without being called. He sat beside the boy, didn't touch him, didn't look him directly in the eye. Just waited. The tapping slowed, then stopped. And Jace did something no one expected. He slid off his chair and sat beside Cart on the floor. He didn't pet him, didn't say anything. He just sat. After 10 minutes, Jace whispered, "He's not like the other dogs." The teacher's eyes welled up. "He knows," I said. "He doesn't ask anything from you. He just stays." That night, I pulled the elephant from its shelf again. Cart had started leaving it behind more often, but I never moved it far. It wasn't just a toy anymore. It was a symbol, a timeline, the beginning and the reminder. I set it gently beside him as he lay near the couch. His eyes followed the movement, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he rested his head beside it, and for the first time, I saw something in his face I hadn't noticed before. Relief. Like he no longer had to carry it all. I sat beside him, legs crossed, fingers brushing his fur. "You don't have to hold on to it anymore," I whispered. "You already gave it to someone who needed it." He didn't move, but his breathing deepened. I remembered something Lana had said to me early on. He doesn't comfort because he's trained to. He comforts because he understands. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch. I lay on the floor beside him. No words, no need. Just the kind of silence that says, "I see you." The next visit was different. We were called into a hospital for a child who hadn't spoken since losing both parents in a fire. He was only 8. The staff didn't have high hopes. They just wanted to try. Cart stepped into that room like he'd already been there, like he understood what it meant to walk into someone else's grief and not rearrange it, not cover it with words, just share it. The boy didn't look up at first. He sat on the bed, arms wrapped tightly around his chest, eyes locked on a crack in the wall. Cart stood still, waited. Then he did something none of us expected. He dropped the elephant. Not near the bed. At the boy's feet. It was the first time Cart had let it go since the shopping cart. The boy looked down, slowly, then back at Cart. He picked up the toy and held it like it was made of glass. For a full minute, no one moved. Then, without warning, the boy started to cry. Not loud, just steady, silent tears. His fingers gripped the elephant tighter as he leaned forward and touched Cart's head. That moment changed everything. Not just for the boy, for Cart. He didn't return to the toy that night, didn't look for it in my bag. He simply rested by the door, eyes distant, like he was thinking about someone far away. I sat with him, ran my hand down his back. "You left it for him," I said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. I understood. The elephant was never meant to stay with Cart. It was meant to be passed on to the ones still waiting, like he once had. The ones who needed something to hold when the world stopped making sense. Over the next few weeks, Cart changed. Not in his behavior. He was still the same calm, quiet presence. But in his posture, he walked with a kind of quiet certainty now, like he knew his place in the world. Like the question had finally been answered. Why was I left? And the answer was this: to show others they weren't. I started keeping a journal. Not for me, for Cart. I recorded every visit, every child who touched his fur, every adult who cried into his neck, every time someone said, "I don't know what we would have done without him." He never needed words. But I wanted there to be a record. because dogs like Cart don't ask to be remembered, but they deserve to be. One evening, we returned to the park near the shopping lot, where I'd first seen him. I hadn't planned to stop there, but something told me it was time. We walked the sidewalk together. Cart's stride was steady, unhurried, no leash, no hesitation. When we reached the corner near the old lot, he paused. The sun was just dipping behind the buildings, the same kind of golden light that had cast shadows on a car too full of silence. Cart looked around, not frantic, not scared, just thoughtful. And then he sat, right there, at the edge of the parking lot, like he remembered, and like he was saying goodbye. I crouched beside him, fingers finding his fur. "We're not going back," I said softly, "but we can visit, just for a minute." He didn't move, didn't blink, but his tail thumped once against the concrete. And then, slowly, he stood, turned, and walked away. The flyer had been taped to the door when I arrived at the shelter that morning. Plain white paper, typewritten text, no colors, no images, just a few simple lines asking for volunteers for a group home on the far edge of the city, a program for teens who had aged out of foster care. "These aren't kids anymore," Lana told me when I asked. "They've been through everything. Some are angry, some don't talk. All of them have been let down more times than you and I can imagine." Her voice carried a weight it usually didn't, and that told me everything. I looked down at Cart, who had been resting near my desk, eyes half closed but ears always listening. I didn't have to ask him. We were going. The shelter was tucked away behind chain-link fencing and overgrown hedges. It used to be a school, judging by the brick exterior and faint outlines of painted playground rules, still clinging to the walls. Inside, it was clean but cold, functional, not warm. The kind of place built to provide safety, not comfort. The moment we stepped in, the air felt heavier. Cart paused at the doorway, nose lifting slightly. He could feel it, too. A counselor met us at the entrance, clipboard in hand, and a tired smile on her face. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Just so you know, they might not react much. They're not used to, well, soft things." I nodded, keeping my voice low. "We're not here to fix anything." She led us down a hall lined with faded posters and dented lockers until we reached the common room. About a dozen teens were scattered throughout. Some lounged on couches, others hovered in corners with hoods up and headphones in. A few glanced our way when we entered, but none said a word. Cart stood still for a moment. Then he moved. Slow, measured. He didn't walk to the center of the room. Didn't try to make an entrance. He moved along the wall, nose low, like he was tracing invisible lines. No one called to him. No one reached out, except one. A boy in the back. 16, maybe 17. Hood up, arms crossed, eyes narrow. He didn't move when Cart stopped a few feet in front of him. Didn't speak, just watched. Cart stood still. And then, without warning, he turned and walked away. Back to me. I crouched beside him, confused. "What is it?" He looked up at me, then back at the boy. And then I saw it. He'd left something behind. The elephant. I didn't even know he'd brought it. I hadn't seen him carry it in. Hadn't felt it tucked into my bag. But there it was, on the floor in front of the boy's chair. The boy stared at it. At first, like it was a trick. Then, like it was a memory. He slowly uncrossed his arms, reached down, picked it up, held it in his hands like it might fall apart. He whispered something, so quiet I nearly missed it. "I had one like this." His fingers brushed the worn fabric, eyes locked on the missing ear. Cart didn't move, but his tail gave a single soft wag against the floor. Not a command, not an invitation, just a signal. "I see you." That single act changed the room. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, like a fog lifting. One of the girls near the window looked over and whispered, "Is that his toy?" The counselor nodded. "Cart's the one he never gave up, until now." The boy didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Cart had given him more than words could. He had given him belief that something broken could still be offered, and still be accepted. After that visit, Cart was quieter than usual. Even for him, he didn't eat much that evening. Didn't curl up on the couch or by the door. He lay beside the bookshelf, where the elephant usually rested. But it wasn't there anymore, and I could see the space where it had always been. It was empty now. I knelt beside him, ran my hand down his side. "You okay, bud?" He didn't move, didn't look at me. But he let out that long, familiar sigh, the one that always meant he was letting something go. And I realized something I hadn't before. Cart had carried that elephant because it was the only piece of his story he had left to hold. And now that he had given it away, he was free. Later that night I went into my office and opened the journal I'd been keeping. I flipped to a new page and wrote, "Today, Cart gave away the last piece of his beginning. Not because he forgot, but because he remembered what it felt like to need something that still smelled like hope." I found him the next morning by the front door, sitting upright, alert, waiting. But not like he used to. Not for someone to come back. Now, he was waiting to go forward. Our next visits were different. There was no elephant now, no tether to the past. But Cart didn't need it. He didn't carry things anymore. He became them. The comfort, the warmth, the reminder. He was the blue elephant now, in a way. And everywhere we went, people felt it. Some leaned into him, some cried. Some said nothing at all, but they all knew. He wasn't just a therapy dog. He was a story made flesh, one that had waited, endured, healed, and then helped others do the same. It had been 3 weeks since Cart left the elephant at the shelter, and though he hadn't looked for it once, I could feel the difference. He moved through the house, the same way he did through the world, gently, silently, but with something added now. Something new in the way his paws touched the floor, in the way his eyes scanned a room. Confidence, maybe. Or maybe something deeper than that. Purpose. He no longer followed me from room to room. Now, he waited for me. Like he was ready when I was, but didn't need to cling to me to belong. We visited more schools, more shelters, more places people forgot to think about, until life forced them to. At every stop, Cart did what Cart always did. He found the ones who didn't want to be found. He waited until they looked up, and then he stayed. One day, Lana called. "There's a girl I want you to meet," she said. Well, more like a girl I need Cart to meet. Her voice was different this time. Not professional, personal. She's been in and out of the system since she was 4. She's 13 now. Hard walls, sharp tongue, but under all that, I think she's still looking for something. Maybe someone. We agreed to meet at a residential center, an hour outside the city, the kind that wasn't quite a facility, and not quite a home, just a place in between. I didn't ask for the girl's name. I wanted Cart to meet her the same way he met everyone else, without pretext, without judgment. When we arrived, a staff member buzzed us in through a steel security gate. Inside, the building was quiet, sterile, like a hospital without the urgency. "She's in the rec room," the woman said. "But she won't talk to you. Just so you know." "That's okay," I replied. We didn't come to talk. The rec room was large and open. One wall was lined with bookshelves, another with board games and puzzles no one seemed to touch. In the center was a threadbare couch, stained at the corners. A girl sat there alone, hoodie pulled over her head, headphones in, arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge us at all. Cart didn't hesitate. He moved slowly, circled wide, approached from the side, never straight on. He sat about 4 feet from her. Didn't bark, didn't whine, just waited. She didn't move. Minutes passed. Then her fingers twitched, and Cart lay down, still silent, still present. A staff member came in, opened her mouth to say something, but I raised a hand gently. "Let them be," I whispered. The woman hesitated, then nodded and backed out. I sat on the floor near the door, far enough to give space, close enough to bear witness. The girl didn't take her headphones off, but eventually she reached into her pocket, pulled something out. A tiny plastic figurine, scuffed and chipped. It looked like a dog, cartoonish, well loved. She set it on the floor between them. Cart didn't touch it, didn't move, but his eyes softened. That was all she needed. We stayed there for an hour. Neither of them moved much, but something was shared between them that words could never carry. A memory, a longing, a mirrored ache, and for once, she didn't flinch from it. When we finally stood to leave, Cart turned to her, leaned forward, and nudged the figurine closer to her hand. Her eyes flicked toward him, and she nodded. Not at me, at him. On the drive home, Cart rested in the back seat, not asleep, but calm. I glanced at him through the mirror. You're good at this, you know. He didn't lift his head, but I saw the soft wag of his tail, and that was enough. Later that night, I found him staring out the window. The city lights blinked far in the distance. I stood beside him, looking out too. You think about them after we leave, don't you? I asked. His ears shifted, just slightly. I sat beside him. I do too. And then we were just two shadows, sitting in the hush of a quiet house, remembering kids who would open their hearts for just a moment and let him in. The next morning, I got a call from the center. She asked about him, the staff member said. She's not ready for visits, but she's drawing again. Dogs. All of them look like him. I hung up, set the phone down, and sat on the edge of the bed. Cart padded in from the hallway. He sat beside me. Didn't look up, but leaned into my leg, as if to say, she'll be okay. Not because of him, but because something in her recognized something in him and didn't run from it. Sometimes that's all healing is. Recognition without retreat. That day, we didn't go anywhere. No hospitals, no classrooms, no shelters. We just stayed home. Cart lay in the backyard under the shade of the old oak tree, eyes half closed, nose twitching in the wind. He didn't need me near him to feel safe anymore, and I didn't need him beside me to know we were still walking the same road. A dog and a man, two once lost things who found each other in the in-between, and stayed. Cart and I had settled into a rhythm most people wouldn't recognize as routine, but it was ours. Every morning he waited by the front door while I poured coffee. Every evening he curled near the bookshelf, beneath the spot where the elephant had once rested. Even though the toy was gone, something about that corner still belonged to him, like it carried the scent of the beginning, the weight of memory. We'd been on nearly 24 visits in the past few months, some to places that welcomed us with open arms, others to places that met us with folded ones. Cart never changed. He didn't need applause. He wasn't a performer. He was a presence. And presence, I'd learned, was sometimes louder than words. Lana called again one Thursday morning. This one's different, she said quietly. They are hosting a group of newly arrived refugee children, ages 6 to 10. Most of them don't speak English yet. Some barely speak at all. Cart lifted his head from his blanket as I listened. There's trauma, Lana continued. Displacement, language barriers. Some don't even know where their parents are. I looked at Cart. He was already on his feet, standing beside me. We'll be there, I said. The center was a converted church hall, long wooden beams overhead, tall windows with old glass that caught the light like honey. There were drawings taped to the walls, crayon landscapes of mountains, houses, suns with long arms. None of the pictures had people in them. A volunteer greeted us at the door. Shy, she said softly. Skittish. I understand, I replied, nodding toward Cart. So is he. She led us into the main room, where 12 children sat in small clusters, some whispering in hushed voices, others sitting alone with paper and pencils. No one was running. No one was laughing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was cautious. Cart took one step inside and stopped. I felt the shift in him immediately. His body lowered, ears alert but relaxed. He scanned the room, not like a guard, but like someone looking for familiar shadows. Then he moved. Not quickly, not in a straight line. He weaved between tables, past quiet stairs, toward the corner where a boy sat alone, head down, pencil in hand, sketching without lifting his gaze. Cart approached, paused a few feet away, and laid down. That was all. No bark, no nudge, no tail wag, just stillness. I stayed at the back of the room, watching. After a few minutes, the boy's hands stopped moving. His head tilted slightly, eyes flicking toward the strange shape on the floor beside him. Cart didn't meet his eyes, just kept still. Then the boy reached down, slowly, and let his fingers brush Cart's fur. It was the first contact. The room didn't erupt. There was no magical moment of sudden healing, but something loosened. I saw it ripple. Another child stood, cautiously stepping closer. A girl with tangled hair and bare feet. She sat beside the boy, near Cart, and whispered something in a language I didn't understand. Cart turned his head just slightly toward her. She smiled, just for a second. Then another joined, and another. Within 10 minutes, Cart was surrounded by children who hadn't touched anyone in days. They didn't laugh, they didn't shout, but their silence had changed. Now it felt shared. Cart moved just enough to lay his head across the boy's foot. The boy smiled down at him. Not big, but real. After the visit, the staff offered us water and thanked us with tired eyes. I crouched to refill Cart's travel bowl, watching him drink with slow, careful laps. One of the counselors approached. "You know," she said quietly, "we have therapy dogs visit sometimes. The kids usually pet them, maybe smile once or twice. But your dog—" I glanced at Cart. "He didn't try to make them happy," she said. "He just let them be not okay." I nodded. "That's Cart," I said. "He doesn't come to cheer you up. He comes to make sure you don't disappear." That night, Cart and I didn't speak. Not that we ever really did. But as I watched him rest by the bookshelf again, something struck me. He'd done more with silence than most people could with 1,000 words. He didn't need language. He was language for all the kids too lost to talk, too broken to explain, too tired to be found again. He became the answer they hadn't dared to ask for. I opened the journal and wrote, "Today, Cart sat with children who had no words. They touched his fur like it was a prayer, and in that quiet, they began to remember what safety felt like." The next day, Lana called again. "They're asking for you two," she said. "Who?" "The kids. They don't say your names, but they draw him." One of them even put a toy dog in his sketch and wrote, "My friend who listens." Cart lay near the door again, head resting on his paws. He didn't lift his head. But I swear his ears perked just enough to hear that. We went back the next week. Same children, same room, but this time there was a difference. This time they ran to him. It was Elise, the trainer who first evaluated Cart, who told me about the memory wall. "There's a place at the monastery in the hills," she said. "A retreat for grieving families, hospice patients, even first responders. They built a wall there, not for names, not for religion, just memories. People pin up photos, letters, anything they need to leave behind." I listened quietly as she spoke. "It's peaceful," she added, "and they're looking for calm therapy animals. Presence matters more than touch." Cart was resting beside the front door when I hung up. He looked up at me, not moving, just waiting for the next choice. I gave him a small nod. "We'll go." The monastery sat nestled in the hills like it had always been part of the land. No billboards, no signs, just gravel paths, stone buildings and tall trees swaying gently in the wind. We arrived early, before the day's first light broke fully across the horizon. The silence was thicker here, not empty, but full of something unspoken, a weight of reverence. The kind of quiet that asks you not to fill it with noise. A monk met us at the courtyard entrance. He wore a simple robe, sandals, and the kind of expression that spoke volumes without needing words. "You're the one with the dog," he said softly. I nodded. He looked down at Cart. Cart looked back. Ears relaxed. Posture still. "I think he understands already," the monk said with a faint smile. The memory wall was unlike anything I had expected. It wasn't grand or ornate, just a long, smooth wooden surface mounted beneath an open-beamed overhang. People had pinned pictures, notes, poems, bracelets, even baby socks. Some items were weathered by time and sun. Others were new, still crisp. No names, no titles, just pieces of pain and love. And what was left when both collided? Cart stepped forward, slow and measured. He didn't sniff, didn't explore. He just walked to the wall and sat, then lay down beside it, and stayed. People began to arrive, couples, families, individuals, moving as if their hearts had been carrying stones too heavy to set down in public. Some brought items to pin. Others just stood, reading what others had left. Cart didn't move unless someone approached him, and even then, he let them choose. One man, early 40s, salt in his beard and grief in his eyes, sat on the ground near him without saying a word. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed, worn. He didn't read it. He didn't pin it. He just held it in both hands while his other hand rested on Cart's back. After a few minutes, he whispered, "She would have liked you." Cart leaned in, just slightly. The man nodded. "Yeah, I know." As the sun moved overhead, the crowd changed. Some left. Others arrived. Each one carried a different kind of ache, and somehow Cart met each one with exactly what they needed. Nothing more, nothing less. A woman in her 70s sat beside him with a framed photo of a child, no older than 5. She didn't speak, just let tears roll freely down her face as Cart laid his head gently across her feet. A firefighter in uniform came by, jacket half open, eyes distant. He didn't sit, just looked down at Cart, then nodded once and moved on. A teenage boy came running in with a crumpled picture clutched in his fist. He stood in front of the wall, trembling, then fell to his knees. Cart walked at him. "No hurry." The boy wrapped both arms around his neck and sobbed. No one said a word, and no one needed to. Near the end of the afternoon, as the light grew gold and long, the monk returned. He watched Cart for a long time before speaking. "We have visitors from all over the world," he said. "Some come looking for peace, others for forgiveness. Some don't even know what they're looking for until they find it here." He turned toward me. "Your dog brings something that belongs here." I looked at Cart, who had now returned to the base of the wall, lying with his paws tucked neatly beneath him. The monk smiled. "He doesn't heal by touching people." "No," I said. "He heals by not leaving them." As we prepared to leave, I walked up to the wall one last time. I hadn't brought anything to leave behind, but I stood there anyway, staring at a photo of a boy and a black Labrador both smiling at a lake's edge. I thought about Cart in the shopping cart, the toy, the waiting, and I whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Behind me, Cart sat quietly, eyes on the trees. That night, Cart didn't sleep in his usual spot. He stood by the back door, looking out across the yard, as if the memories he'd witnessed were still moving through him. I sat beside him on the porch. He didn't lean in, didn't sigh. He just stared. And I did too, because sometimes silence is the only thing strong enough to hold the weight of what we feel. In my journal, I wrote, "Today, Cart became a witness." He didn't fix grief. He simply honored it. There would be more places, more people, more pain. But that day, Cart had stood beside a wall of what had been lost. And without saying a word, he helped remind them it had all been real. And that maybe, in some way, it still was. Winter arrived slowly that year. The leaves didn't fall all at once. They drifted, scattered by wind and memory. Mornings grew colder. The sun slower to rise, and each day, Cart seemed to move through the house with a different kind of presence. Still calm, still quiet. But quieter in a way I didn't fully understand yet. His steps were careful, his gaze longer. He still met children at centers and hospitals, still lay beside veterans who didn't speak, still comforted parents who had outlived their children. But something in him had shifted again. Not tired, not weak, just full, like a cup no longer being poured into, but instead being offered. One evening, after a visit to a school where a boy had clung to him for nearly an hour without saying a word, Cart came home, curled up on the rug, and didn't move for hours. He watched the door, but this time not as if he were waiting for someone to return, more like he was making sure no one else left. I began to notice small changes. He started sleeping more, eating less, walking slower. At first I told myself it was just age, or maybe the weather, but the truth was heavier than that. Cart was getting older, and not just in years, in spirit. Dogs like Cart don't just grow old. They carry what they've taken in, the tears, the silence, the broken things they never tried to fix, but simply sat beside, and over time, even the strongest hearts begin to soften beneath the weight of that kind of love. We took fewer visits, not because Cart couldn't go, but because he started choosing not to. He'd stand near the door, watch me get the bag ready, then turn back toward the living room and lay down, not out of refusal. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew someone else needed to go in his place. Someone newer, someone who hadn't yet given every piece of themselves away. I reached out to Elise. She had a young shepherd in training, bright, gentle, eager. "You think Cart's retiring?" she asked. When I told her, I looked across the room, where Cart was lying beside the bookshelf, eyes half closed but alert. "No," I said quietly. "I think he's returning. Returning to himself, to rest, to peace." The following week, I brought the younger dog, his name was Milo, into our home for a few trial visits. Cart watched him carefully, not possessive, not dismissive, just observant. Milo was enthusiastic, full of energy, tail constantly moving. At first, Cart didn't engage. But one afternoon, as Milo bounded through the living room chasing a rolled-up sock, Cart stood, walked over, and lay down beside him, and nudged the sock back with his paw. Milo froze, ears perked, then gently batted it back. It was the only time I'd seen Cart play in years. But even then, it wasn't about fun. It was about passing something on. A week later, I brought Milo to one of our regular shelter stops. Cart watched us from the window. He didn't follow, didn't try to come. But when we returned, Milo bounding ahead of me, full of praise from the staff, Cart stood at the door to greet him. No barking, no excitement, just that soft, slow tail wag. The same kind he'd given the first day he'd stepped out of that cart and into my life. The snow came early in January, thick, white and muffling the world in soft quiet. Cart took to watching it fall from the porch, nose lifted, eyes blinking slowly. He didn't like the cold, but he loved the silence. And on one particularly still night, as I sat beside him on the steps, he rested his head on my thigh, closed his eyes, and sighed. The kind of sigh that says, "I've done all I needed to do, and maybe more." A week later, we visited the memory wall, one last time. The monks greeted us quietly. They seemed to sense it without me saying a word. Cart walked slowly, not frail, not struggling, just reverent. He stopped in front of the wall. Not to lie down this time, to stand. He looked at the photos, the letters, the trinkets pinned with hope and grief. And then, without instruction, he lowered himself to the ground, rested his head between his paws, and closed his eyes. I sat beside him. Neither of us said anything. But something about the way the wind moved through the trees that day felt like a benediction. Like the world itself was whispering, "Thank you. We didn't stay long. Cart didn't need to. He had said goodbye in the way only he could, by simply showing up one last time. That night, I wrote in the journal, Cart gave the world everything he had. And now, he's teaching me how to do the one thing he's never asked for, to let go. That was our last visit. Cart didn't pass away that night, or the night after. He stayed. He was still with me, but he no longer needed to be the one who carried it all. Milo began to take his place more often, and Cart rested. For the first time in his life, he rested without waiting for someone to come back, because now he had nowhere left to return to, only the peace of having never left someone behind. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind that slips in soft and quiet, with low light spilling through half-open blinds, and the kind of stillness that makes you whisper without meaning to. Cart hadn't moved from his spot near the bookshelf. That was his place now, curled just beside the corner where the elephant used to rest, though the toy was long gone and had been for months. Still, Cart returned to that spot like it was an altar, a small piece of memory he didn't need to touch to remember. He was slower these days, his breaths deeper, his steps measured, but his eyes never dulled. Not even now. I sat beside him on the floor, coffee cooling in my mug, one hand resting gently on his back. I'd grown used to the rhythm of his breathing, the way his chest rose and fell like the tide steadily, without fanfare. And maybe that's why it struck me when I realized he wasn't asleep. He was watching me, his eyes locked to mine with a softness I couldn't explain. Not sad, not tired, just knowing, like he'd already said goodbye somewhere in the night, and now he was just waiting for me to realize it. I didn't cry right away. I didn't even speak. I just laid my hand flat across his fur, felt the warmth, the pulse beneath it, and I whispered the words I hadn't let myself say until then. You can rest now. He blinked slowly. His ears twitched once. And then, for the first time since the day I found him, Cart leaned his entire body against me. No space left between us. No hesitation. No guard. Just trust. And love. And the final sigh of someone who had stayed long enough to change everything. He passed peacefully that afternoon. No pain. No panic. Just sleep. Deep and real. And free. I stayed beside him for hours. I didn't move. Didn't answer the phone. Didn't open the door when it rang. I just sat. Not because I didn't want to say goodbye, but because I already had. We'd been saying it slowly for months. Every time he stayed behind when I grabbed the bag, every time he watched the door without getting up, every time he touched my leg as if to say, "Go ahead, I've given them everything I could." I wrapped him in the old fleece blanket, the same one from the parking lot, the one I'd folded into that shopping cart like a silent promise. I placed it around him gently, careful not to cover his face. He always liked to see the light. I pressed the top of my head to his and whispered, "Thank you." Then I whispered it again, and again, until the words stopped being words and became something else, something only he and I could understand. The next morning, I took the drive alone, to the monastery. The monks met me at the gate without asking why I was there. They knew grief doesn't knock at that place. It just arrives. I walked the long gravel path with Cart in my arms, wrapped in the same fleece, held the same way I'd lifted him from that cart so long ago. Not because he was helpless, but because he was mine. They'd prepared a place by the edge of the courtyard, near the trees where birds always sang and the sun always broke first in the morning. I laid him there. One of the monks knelt beside me and said nothing. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the only language grief understands. I returned home to an empty house. Milo met me at the door. He'd grown since the day Cart batted a sock back at him. Grown in body, but more in spirit. He didn't bark, didn't jump. He just leaned into my leg, the same way Cart used to. I bent down and whispered, "You're not filling his space. You're creating your own." He licked my hand once and followed me inside. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill and left Cart's collar beneath it. Not the elephant. Not the blanket. Just the collar, because that's all he ever needed to carry. The rest, he left in the people he helped. The children who could sleep again. The veterans who stopped hiding behind silence. The boy who still held the elephant. The girl who started to draw again. The woman who sat by the memory wall and said, "He saw me." Cart was never loud, never flashy, but he changed more lives in silence than most do in speech. He wasn't just a therapy dog. He wasn't just a rescue. He was a witness to pain, to love, to hope that doesn't arrive with fanfare, but with presence. Months passed, and the world kept turning. Milo and I began visiting the same places Cart once had. He didn't do things the same way. He was younger, brighter, more energetic. But every now and then, he'd surprise me. He'd pause beside someone no one else had noticed. He'd wait, just long enough. And in those moments, I saw him remember, not from experience, but from legacy. Because Cart didn't just change people. He changed the air around them. And dogs like Milo, they feel that, they inherit it and carry it forward. One day, we returned to the shopping center. I hadn't planned to, but something about the air felt familiar, and I found myself pulling into the same lot, walking across the same cracked pavement. There was no cart near the edge anymore, just a painted parking spot with faded yellow lines. But I stood there anyway, closed my eyes, and remembered the matted fur, the blue elephant, the stare that said someone promised they'd come back. And I whispered, "I'm still here." Cart waited, longer than he had to, longer than anyone expected, but not because he was lost, because he believed someone would find him. And when no one did, he chose to stay anyway, to love anyway, to give anyway. And in doing so, he gave the world a story, not of rescue, but of presence, of staying, of becoming the one who doesn't need to be saved to save someone else. In the final page of the journal, I wrote, "You were never just a dog in a shopping cart. You were the reason someone stopped and stayed. And because of that, I will always carry you forward."